Welcome to today's tutorial. We'll be going through the 2019 past paper. So let's begin. So Tabo and Sheldon are two avid rugby fans who are currently in Japan touring the country as they follow the Bucks in their various matches. When not at the stadiums cheering loudly while donning their green and cold supporter jerseys, the pair are taking in the sights, sounds, foods, and drinks that Japan has to offer. To their surprise, Japan has craft beer, right? So it has something called craft beer. Don't know what that is, but I guess we'll about to find out. So Tabo and Sheldon decide that they must start sampling the non-alcoholic craft beers, as many as possible. Most people rave about the alcoholic offerings, but they want to do something different by doing a review of the non-alcoholic craft beers per region in Japan. Since they are on holiday, they have approached you to assist them with developing a Visual Basic application that will help them keep track of the non-alcoholic craft beers that they've tried. So craft beer is just basically beer that's a non-alcoholic. And that's what I'm picking up here. So we're supposed to define a record structure called craft beer rec, and it should take in a maximum of blah blah blah. So we'll get to that when we get to that, right? Let's start by creating a what is this? Start by creating a like all the classes. So let's start there. So I'm going to open Visual Studio, and then I'm going to start creating all the classes. So I'm going to say create a new project. It should be on the recent templates. Okay, it's not appearing. And then the languages that I'm going to choose is Visual Basic, and we're going to make use of the Windows Forms app. So let me choose platforms and say Windows. And then project type is desktop, which is D. So where's D? There's D. So Windows Forms app.NET framework, which is this one over here. So I'm going to choose that and then click next. So Windows Forms app.NET framework. So .NET framework, it just means I'm creating it for the Windows platform as it's written Windows. There's this thing called MVC, things like that, or .NET Core, which means it can run on any operating system. We're not gonna get into that, but you understand when you start doing things like informatics too. So informatics 1B, semester test 2, paper A 2019. So I think I'll just do the past paper in one sitting, in one recording, right? This thing of doing multiple parts. I'll just do it in one video. So let's start. So I'm going to go to Solution Explorer, and then right click. I usually like my things to be on the left hand side. So let me try doing that. Okay, so let me edit here and then pin it there. And then let me also add this side. Okay, and then pin it. And then also git, let me edit this side. And then pin it. And then yeah, I like things being on the left panel. So I'm gonna go to Solution Explorer, and then I'm gonna right click, and then I'm gonna say add a new item. Or you can just go to class. It's up to you. So I'm gonna go to class because I want a Visual Basic class. Then I'm gonna create the class. So the one of the classes should be craft beer, if I'm not mistaken. So let's double check. Where is it? Craft beer. Yeah. So if you forget the names, right, what I suggest you do is you copy the name like this, then you go to Visual Studio, you create the class, and then you make sure you have the name written down. So CraftBeer. And you can omit the .vb keyword. It should append it on its own. That's the nice thing about Visual Studio. And then I'm going to need my option statements, because if we want to become good programmers, we need to disable all these cool features that Visual Basic does for us. All these automatic things, right? We need to be explicit. So explicit on and then strict on, so that we cast ourselves. We don't depend on Visual Basic to cast for us. And then we need to create what we call our instance variables, right? Remember what instance variables are. It's just variables that can only be accessed via an instance. So that means that in order for you to access this variable, you have to say craft beer, right, beer. Let's say we call it beer. Okay, just imagine this is a craft beer. It's called beer. So beer, you have to say new craft beer like this, and then this would be an instance of the class. Then now you can call them the variables via this beer instance. Hence, they're called instance variables. Another word for instance is its object. So instance or object variables, but they're typically called instance variables. So let's continue. So each attribute has a corresponding property method. I don't know if I read it in the past in that other paper that I was doing, but that was a practical. So this is a past paper. So they told you that each attribute, right, it has a property method. That means all four have property methods. And they didn't explain what type of property methods they have. So that means it should be both. So you should be able to read and write all these attributes. Since they were not specific. If they were specific, they would have told you, okay, this is a read only, or they should only be accessed. And then if they wanted to be write only, they would have told you. They just said each one has its own property method. So we'll just create property methods for all of them. So we need a unique value 145. I think they mean that it's between that range, 100 and 450. So we need an ID which is of type integer. So private, remember they need to be private as integer. And then I'm gonna put a comment in to remind myself that should be between 400 and 450, just in case when I have to validate or make sure this value is valid. That's what validate means. And then underscore name, which is a string, the name of the craft beer. They should be limited to 35 characters. Let me see but I only recall that you can use the VB fixed string within the record structure, but we'll see. So underscore name, let me see if it will allow me. Underscore name as a string, right? Let me see if it will allow me. So VB, what is it called? Is it VB? Okay, it's not showing the options, but it should be VB fixed string. Let me VB fixed string, right? And then you specify, they said it should be 35, right? Let me see if this will allow me to put it here. Identify expected. Okay, seems like oh, let me put it before. Yeah, let me put it before here. Yeah. So I'm gonna do that. I'm not sure if that's what they expected you to do, but I'm gonna do that because remember, this indicates that the string should be treated as if it was a fixed length. So this is just a keyword to say this should be treated as a fixed length, meaning the maximum number of characters should be 35. That's why I'm saying VB fixed string, because if you checked here, they said it's limited to. That means that's its maximum, right? The maximum is 35 characters. So I have to say VB fixed string. Last time I checked, they've only used it in record structures, but I also use it in the class because they told you that it should be 35 characters. So you should limit it. And then underscore price. Okay, it's underscore name and then underscore price is a double. So private underscore price as a double, right? And then underscore rating as an integer, which is between 0 and 10. So I'm going to put those comments just to help as a reminder for the ranges for each of these variables, as for each of these instance variables. So this will be 0 between 0 and 10. And then we need property methods, right? So I need to say methods. But remember, before we do property methods, the order will always be the order that you should normalize putting it in is you need to have a constructor first. After the constructor, you have property methods. So that's how it should work. But here they did it, they were not specific. You see that they were not really specific. Yeah, they were not specific. They didn't tell you that create a constructor. All they did, right, if you check, okay, this is about the function, blah, blah. All they did here was that they told you that each attribute should have a property method. So I'm assuming since they didn't tell you, I mean, they didn't tell you about this thing, but we can check the mark sheet. So you see the mark sheet, they said there's marks for property methods. So definition includes attributes and properties. They didn't mention constructor. But when you go to the JRegion, they talk about the constructor. So there's a constructor there, but let's just double check. So a constructor containing the parameters, the name, and then the number of beers, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, so they didn't tell you to create the constructor. So you must follow the instructions. Hence they told you to create property methods because they want you to get the values via property methods. So this means that the property method should be both read and write, meaning that you should just call it property method. So I'm going to say property, I'm going to say public property. Let's start with ID. So I'm gonna say ID and then as integer, the types need to match. And property. How come it's not picking it up? Okay, it's fine. It's not auto-completing the way I'm expecting it to. So get, which is fine, datas. So to get the ID, I must just to use the return keyword. And then this is the value that I'm getting from the user. So I need to say underscore ID is equals to that value that I'm getting from the user. And then I create a property methods for the name. So let's create the property method for the name. So public property name with no underscore. Remember, underscores it's only reserved for instance variables. So end property and then put a get. You should autocomplete and then return underscore name. And then underscore name is equals to that value. Not as integer, as string. I'm messing it up now as string, and then this would be as string because name is a string, so string type. And then what else do we have? We have price, which is a double, then rating, which is an int. So public property price as a string, not as a string, as a double, and then end property. I don't know why it's not auto-completing, but that's fine. Return underscore price. If we have to validate, we'll validate when we get there. So far, I'm still where they discussed about property method, one thing at a time. If they told me to validate or create a validate method, then I'll do so. And then rating. But you should validate, you should normalize validating. The rating is an integer as integer and property. Yeah, I think it's best to have one video so that you just watch one video, and then once you're done, you're done. Underscore rating is equals to value from the user. The reason why I'm saying maybe validation is required because all of these things that we have, they have ranges, right? For example, price cannot be negative. So that means it should be at least 0. So you can do that, right? If you have the time to do so. But there is no marks for that. So yeah. And then we have, okay, this was a short paper, if I'm being honest. This was a very short paper. So CraftBeer, right, also has the following methods. CalcBeerValue. So it has the following method. The first method is CalcBeerValue, a function that returns the underscore price divided by the rating. If the result is a value less than 0, then return 0. So yeah, we need to use some logic there. So they said it should return. So it's returning division, so which is a double, right? So I need to say public function. And I know it's a function because they said it should return, should give me back a value. So since they said it should return, and based on what the answer is, it should return that answer or return 0. So in my case, I'm gonna use I could create a local variable, right? Like say dim, whatever. But remember, we can use the function's name as a variable. So I'm going to say calc value is equals to, they said we should take the price, right, divided by the rating. Then based on this value, so I need to do an if statement. If calc value was less than 0, not O, less than 0, then what should happen? Because they said if it is less than 0, then return 0. So you should return 0 if it happened to be less than 0. But else, you can just return that value, which is just calc value. There's two ways you can go about doing it. You can put an else there, or you can just do this. Let me show you the second approach. You can just remove the else, and then at the end of the day, you're gonna return calc value. Why? Because this if statement will only execute if this condition is true. So if it's false, that means it will skip it entirely. And then you just give us back the price divided by the rating. So that's the second approach. Or you can just put in else. And else should also suffice, should be enough. And then output a function that returns a single line denoting they said a single line. Yeah. Be very careful of instruction. They said a single line. They said a single line. So you should output the ID, name, price, rating, and then the value of the craft beer separated by spaces. They said line, a single line. So I'll create it as a function that returns because it's supposed to return a string, right? So as a string, and then I'm going to use the function name to store the values. Or I can avoid that entirely. I just return because I said you should return the ID followed by that in one line. So return ID, right? Ampersand space, because they need to be separated by space in between. So I need to output them in that exact order. ID name, so underscore name, and a space, and the price, so underscore price. Okay, for the price they didn't, but I highly recommend you normalize rounding off, because remember the price is a double. So the price of one beer in yen, right? Here they just use 500, but then they say the type is double. So that means there might be a remainder. And so we need to output it in those decimal places. So they didn't tell you, right? I don't think there's marks for that, but I'll put it because it makes the output better. So I'm gonna format my price up to. two decimal places. Hence, I use the hash symbol because I want it to be formatted up to. And a space. And then after the price, I think it's the rating. Yeah, the rating. So underscore rating and a space. There's quite a lot. And the last thing is the calc beer value. So this is me dot calc beer value. You don't have to use the me. I'm just using it for emphasis that this is my calc value. This is my part of me, right? And we can also put in an environment dot new line and a new line, an end of line character at the end. And then we are done. So this is how it should look in full. I hope you can see. So it's the ID space, the name space, the price space, the rating space, beer value. There's not like calc beer value. After calc beer value, see that there shouldn't be anything. So I don't need the space is not necessary. But I can make sure that the next text starts on the new line. And then that's pretty much all we need inside. Like I said, this paper was short. Maybe yeah, this was short. This was an easy paper. Yeah, it was an easy paper compared to, or maybe okay, it was an easy paper. So that means your test won't be that bad. And then next you need to create a JRegion. So I need to copy that with the following properties. Oh, so it must instantiate craft beer objects. Oh, so this is composition. That's why it was short. It's not inheritance. It's composition or yeah, or aggregation. It depends. But here you said that it does what? Instantiate them, right? So it's actually composition because that means JRegion is managing this life cycle of craft beer. By managing its life cycle, it means that if JRegion didn't exist, then probably craft beer wouldn't also exist. It's like you and your heart. If you didn't exist, your heart wouldn't exist. So therefore, that's what we call composition. There's a life cycle dependency. So yeah, I'm gonna call it JRegion. So this is very short and sweet. So Solution Explorer, and then add a new class, and then paste JRegion, done. And then I don't want to type again, so I'm just going to copy these option statements to make my life easier, right? And then we're going to have our instance variables. Hence, they didn't require the constructor. Makes sense because there's not composition here. We don't have to go use my base and things like that. So, define a class called JRegion with the following properties. So we need to have a name, num, beers, etc. But they didn't put the underscores, but you should put the underscores. Remember, that's how we define. They made a mistake. They forgot to put it. That's how we should define our variables. They'll keep there's marks for that. So private underscore name as a string, and then private underscore num beers as integer for the number of beers, and then BS, right, which is an array. You see, they said it's an array for size num beers. So the size is num beers. That means it's dynamic of type craft beer. So hence we have composition now. So private underscore um beers, right? Open brackets as what's the type here? It's craft beer. So craft beer. So this is what would denote as composition, right? Then we need to have our methods. Remember, a constructor is also a method, but it's a special type of a method, which is just only meant to construct or build the object. So it's going to be under the comment for methods. So we need a constructor which contains the following parameters. underscore name of type string, which is used to set the underscore name instance variable. I know it sounds weird, but take it as it is. They told you like that. They said pass it as underscore name. They want to test if you know how to use the me keyword. Remember what we talked about. If it's exactly the same name, you have to distinguish or help Visual Basic to know the difference. So let me create the constructor, public sub new. They said it should take in an underscore name, a string, comma, and then it should also take in num or number. Is it num or number of beers? So follow the instructions exactly as they told you to name it like that. I know you might be like, well, we shouldn't name it like that. I know they advised you, but they're trying to test you if you understand or you know how to follow instructions and use different techniques, right? So the underscore name of type string should be used to set the underscore instance variable. You see, they use that term that I'm talking about, instance variable. So if I say underscore name is equals to underscore name like this, Visual Basic will get confused that which underscore name are you talking about? Which one is on the left-hand side? Is it the one that's being passed as a parameter to this constructor, or it's the one that's an instance variable? It gets confused. To distinguish or to help, it even tells you that it's unnecessary because it thinks you're assigning it to the same thing. It's confused. So you need to use the me keyword. So me dot underscore name to say my name is equals to the other underscore name. They were trying to test that you understand how to use the me keyword. And then number of beers of type integer, which is used to set the underscore num beers. You see, they didn't make a mistake by telling you to name it this. So now we just set the underscore num beers. So this underscore num beers should be set to the number of beers that are being passed in the constructor. But remember, we have an array, which is underscore beers. We need to deal with that array. They told you that its size is num beers. And they even reminded you that in addition, the constructor must also instantiate the CraftBeer objects. But before I instantiate the CraftBeer object, I need to resize it or give it a size. Because remember previously it's empty, right? We need to resize. So I need to use the redeem keyword. And then within the round brackets, I pass in the size, which is num underscore num beers. After I've initialized it, remember there's multiple beers, right? There's multiple beers, and I need to instantiate them. Now I see why they didn't tell you. They told you not to create the constructor because if you did, you're gonna face issues here. So let me show you what I mean. So for I as integer, there's always a reason why they structured the paper like that. Don't try to do your own things. So 1 to underscore num beers I, and then I need to, because there's multiple beers, right? So I need to go through all of the beers at once and instantiate them. Is equals to new craft beer like this. You see why they didn't tell you to create a constructor? Because if you had created a constructor here, you'd have to pass the information. And where would you get it? Now you have to pass it here, which is remember this is not inheritance, right? So we shouldn't pass information here. So hence they didn't tell you to create the constructor. So follow instructions. So we've instantiated all the beers. Hence I use the for loop because there's multiple beers, right? And then or multiple craft beers. And then I need to create calc average rating. This is a very short paper. I'll see if I manage to finish quickly, then I might also do the UML. This is a very short paper, so I might do everything, including the UML. So calc average rating, this method returns the average rating of craft beers. So it should return the average rating of craft beers. So it returns. You see the keyword is returns. Where do you see the return keyword in a function? So therefore you must create a function. So I'm going to come here and say public function average. Remember, average returns a double. even though it can return a 0, we use double because we want to accommodate all possibilities. It can return a single integer, but it can also return a double. But remember, if you return a double, even if it returns a single integer, that's 0. Let's say it's 0 or 1. We can just say it's 1.0, which is the same as 1. It's exactly the same thing. So hence I use the double to accommodate both probabilities or possibilities. So this method returns the average rating of the craft beers. They say the average rating. So that means I need to sum up all the ratings and then divide it by the number of ratings that are there. Divided by the number of craft beers, which is because it's the rating for each craft beer, meaning that the number I should divide by is the number of craft beers, which is underscore num beers. If you understand how to get an average or the mean. So I need to go through each craft beer. So for I as integer is equals to 1, 2, underscore num beers, right? And I need to sum them up. So what I can do is, like I said, we can use the function's name, calc_ev rating, and set it to 0.0, right? It starts at 0, and then I use it to sum up. So calc_ev rating plus equals underscore beers, right? At that specific position I, but I need the rating. So dot rating. That's why they told you to create property methods. So here I'm accessing it via property method. So dot rating like this, which sums up all the ratings, but then we need the average. So I need to return, right, the average. So return calc average rating divided by underscore num beers. Because remember, calc average rating will store the sum, but I want the average. So I need to divide by the number of beers. Since each beer has a rating, so the number that we divide by is num beers. Remember, plus equals just means take the current value or the current sum inside calc_ev rating like this, and then add this current rating to it. So it's like a shorthand for that. So that means exactly the same thing, but I'll use the shorthand or the shortcut for that, which is just plus equals. And then we are literally done with the classes. Okay, I'm not done, almost. So they have to output. This was a very short paper. You should have done it in like an hour. 1 hour, 30 minutes should have been enough. Output a function that returns. They told you that it's a function that returns a multi-line string. So it does return a multi-line string, right? Denoting, blah, blah, blah. So let's do that one thing at a time. So they told you here, though explicit, they told you it's a function. So public function output as a string. Remember, this is not inheritance, so I do not have to make this function overridable because there's no base class, it's just composition. I do not have to make it overridable. So keep that in mind. So it needs to output a multi-line string denoting the region's name, right? So we need to details on each of the craft beers. So on each of the craft beers, oh, okay, no, I'm reading it wrong. So you should output the region's name first. So let's do that. Region's name. So I'm going to say output, right? And then I'm going to say initialize it to an empty string first. And then I'm going to say output, and then I'm going to say ampersand equals to just say append to the current. You could also say plus equals, right? It's the same thing. I'm going to say and equals, they say the region's name, so underscore name, which is this name that's currently here. So underscore name, it represents the region's name, and environment dot new line, right? And then yeah, the region's name. And what else? And okay, so I'm going to say output and equals to, so append, or remember the and equals or plus equals just means add to the current information. So to the current information, add the details of on each of the craft beers. Remember, there's multiple craft beers. So I have to actually use a for loop here. So I have to say for I as integer is equals to 1 to underscore num beers, right? To go through all of the craft beers. And then I want to append. Remember, craft beer has its own toString output function, which is this one, right? So I need to call that on each beer, but I need to append it to what? To my output string, to that output variable. So ampersand and ampersand equals or and equals, I append my underscore beers at that position I call the output function. And it's fine, I can leave it like this, right? Because why? The output function, remember it returns, it also has a environment.newline. So I can leave it like that. Or if I want it to be a bit clean, what I can do, if I want it to be a bit clean, I can append another environment.newline. So let me do that so that they are divided. There's like 2 spaces in between each beer or craft beer. Also here, I'm going to append another environment.newline just for the sake of it being neat. That's all. And then after I've appended all the information for the craft beers, what's missing? They said as well as the calc average rating. So I need to call the calc average rating function and up to. You see what I was talking about, the exactly and up to thingy. They said up to, so you must use hash. If they said exactly, then you have to say use zeros. So they can ask you in both ways. Calc average rating. So output ampersand equals me dot calc average rating. But remember, they said it should be in what? So I'm gonna extract this. So it should be in what? Should be rounded off to up to 3 decimal places. So pass the value and then round it up to. So I need to use hash. So hash like this. That means up to. And then we are done with the string, and they said it's a multi-line, so it is on multiple lines. Hence, we use the environment.newline. Then we need to return our string. So return output. And then we are done with this class. So it was pretty straightforward if you ask me. It was not bad. And then the instance objects of JRegion, right? The application must allow the user to specify the number of region objects they wish to create. So there could be multiple region objects. So I need to go to my main now. So to my so I'm so used to C++ and C# and Java because it is a main. So I need to go to my toolbox and then choose a button. And I know I'm gonna need a text box, right? But we'll deal with that when we get there. So I need a button. So this button, I need to go to my properties. And then the text on the button should say initialize objects, right? I'm just gonna call it initialize objects. I don't know what else to call it. btn init or initialize, whatever you wanna call it. So this will initialize the objects, right? So basically I need to also have the option statements. So let me copy them. So here's my option statements. Copy them, put them here. And then must provide the craft beer as well as the rating of the beer. But okay, so you set the properties of the craft beer. So basically you remember we created property methods for each. So that's how we're going to initialize it. But there's this thing, you remember we have this, we didn't validate. We have that, and then we also have this. So they taught you about validation. So they didn't just put it there for fun. So I'm going to create the validate methods, right? That means I have to create two of them. So what I would do is I'll do a simple validation. If the ID is below 100, I'll force it to be 100. If it's above 450, I'll force it to be 450. So that's how I'm going to validate. So before this, I need to create my, okay, it's fine. Okay, let me just do this. Say okay, let me put it after all the methods, right? So that I can distinguish them. They're still methods, but they're different kinds of methods. Utility methods or helper methods. Utility is another word for helper. So helper methods. And then what I need to do is make it private. Remember, it's a helper method. So private function, validate ID, which takes in some value as an integer, because remember the ID is an integer, and it returns an integer. And then just doing a simple check. If value, remember it's meant to validate the ID. So if value is less than 100, that means our ID is below 100. We need to return 100 to force it to be at that minimum value. Else if, I need to check another condition, else if value happens to be greater than 450, then what should happen? Return 450. Then else, remember there's else when it's none, it's neither. And I need to make sure I return when it's neither. So when it's returned, I just return the value itself, because that means the value is valid, right? So check if the value is less than 100, then return 100 to force it to be 100. If it's greater than 450, return 450, force it to be 450. Else, if it's within the range, then just return the value. That means there's nothing to validate. And then where do I call this? When it's initialized, you see here, when I try to set the ID, I need to make sure it's valid. So validate ID like this. So I need to validate it to make sure it's valid before I set it. And then I scroll down and then I also validate the rating. So I'm gonna say private function validate rating, takes in some value from the user as integer. I think you will get full marks here. They wouldn't um um they wouldn't doubt your code or anything. They'll be like, okay, this person knew that they had to create helper method, which is very good. So remember, rating should be between 0 and 10. So if it happens to be below 0, that means I should return 0 to force it to start at 0. Else, if value happens to be greater than 10, then I should what? Return 10, because I should force it to be at that maximum. Else, that means there's nothing wrong with it, I just return it, which is exactly similar to validate ID. The only difference is the ranges. So I'm gonna look for my rating. When I get the value from the user, I need to validate it to make sure it's valid. So validate rating, which takes in that value from the user, and then done. So now my application is robust. That means that it makes sure that the values are valid. So we have JRegion. So there's multiple regions, right? So I need to say come here and say private. I'm gonna call it regions, right? As JRegion. And then I'm gonna have the number of regions. Or remember, it has to be uppercase. And then I'm gonna have n regions as integer to store the number of regions. So the first thing that I need to do, right? I need to get the number of regions from the user. Right? So I need to say n regions is equals to input box, but then regions is an int, so I need to say cint to convert it to the right type. And then I'm going to say enter the number of regions, right? Yeah, I'm just gonna leave it like that. So once I've gotten the number of regions, what should happen now? I should initialize my array. So allocate memory for the array. So I need to say redeem regions n to be of size n regions. But I still need to instantiate it. But before I instantiate it, right, I need to get the information. So user provides the region name and number of peers. So remember, in order for me to make use of the constructor here, I need to get the number of peers and the name for that region. So I'm going to do a for loop because there's multiple regions, right? So for I as integer is equals to 1 to n regions. And then next I. And then I need to dim name. Okay, for the sake, it's not necessary, right? It's not really necessary to declare them outside, but you should have declared, you should declare them outside for the sake of speed. But it's fine. I'm going to declare them here. So I'm going to say enter the name of region and specify what region number. So put a space and then ampersand I. But I know, remember, I'm using option strict on, so I have to cast explicitly. So that means I have to cast myself. So CSTRI and then ampersand question mark, right? And then dim num of beers as integer. Okay, this one didn't have things like polymorphism, whatever, because there's no inheritance. So don't always cram and be like, yeah, they'll ask inheritance, then they don't bring it, then you're cooked. So enter the number of craft beers for region, followed by a space, and then I'm basically gonna append the same thing here. So I'm gonna do this. I hope you're following through. So I'm just saying enter the number of craft beers for that region. I output the region number and the question mark. That's pretty much all I'm doing here. But then remember, regions is an array that needs to be instantiated. So now I need to actually instantiate it. So regions, since I have the two details for information that I need, the name and the number of beers. So region and I is equals to a new region. New, okay, no, it's not region, new JRegion, right? Which expects a name, which is saved, and number of beers, so number of beers. So we've instantiated the regions. So now we can get information for each craft beer. Remember, there's multiple craft beers. And if you look at craft beers, right, I know they didn't say it, but we might actually need, yeah, they didn't say it. That's the thing. Sometimes they're not gonna tell you. That's a problem. They're not gonna tell you, but let's see. Let me show you what I mean here. Where is it? Yeah, you see that if you check it, the JRegion class with the following properties, right? So they didn't really explain, but yeah, they didn't explain to create property methods or not. And then here they did tell you that each attribute has a corresponding property method. They were explicit. Here they didn't say, but since they didn't say, it's a problem. Okay, it's not really a problem, but remember that we need to access the number of craft beers. We also need to access the array. So I actually need property methods for those. And I need to be able to set the array. They didn't say it. I feel like they wanted you to think. You see, they didn't talk about property methods here. But I need a way to access this array, right? So I need a property method for that. I also need a way to access the number of beers. Accessing the array should suffice because I can call the dot length method. So let me show you that advanced way, which calls the dot length. But I'm sure you've been taught about it. So I need to create my property method. So public property, call it beers, and then it takes in an index because it's an array as integer. The index is an integer, and then the array is craft beer as craft beer. Then done, and then I need to return underscore beers at that specific index, right? And you should always validate your indexes. So yeah, you need to make sure that it's valid. We could throw an put exception handling and throw and then catch exceptions. We could do that. Hypothetically speaking, we could do that. But I don't want to make it too advanced because there's no marks for that. But you can if you can handle it. So as craft beer, right? So this is the array. We create an accessor for it to be able to access, but we should also be able to set the craft beer, right? So this is fine. Remember, you can call the dot length method on craft beer. So now since I have the craft beer, so I'm gonna use J. Remember I, J, K, L, L, M, N, whatever. So I'm gonna use J, and then I'm gonna to that specific region, right? At region I, and then I get the beers at that specific region, right? And then okay, you can't. Yeah, I was thinking about it's not gonna work the way I intended it to work. Yeah, it's not gonna work. Yeah, we have to also create a property method for the number of beers. So public property. Yeah, it's not gonna work. Num of beers. We should return an integer as integer. And property. So the number of beers, right? Am I ever going to set them again? Nope. I just want to access. So therefore, I should make it a read-only property method because I only want to access. So I just want to return that num of beers. I don't want to set them. I just want to access. So this dot num beers, right? And then next J. So I'm going through all the number of beers, right? All those number of beers. Now I can, so I need to say regions. If you remember record structures, right? This is just similar to when you had a record structure within another record structure, like last semester. So regions I dot beers, because I want to get that craft beer, right? At that index J, not IJ. And then I need to set it in that order. So I need to set the ID. Right, so I need to start by setting the ID. So dot ID is equals to, and an ID is an integer. So cint input box like this, right? Cint input box. Then I ask the user to enter the ID. So enter the ID for beer, for craft beer. Let me write it in one word, craft beer, followed by the number for that craft beer, which is J. So CSTRJ, right? And for region, I also specify the region just to help the assistants when they're marking, because they could be marking and also discussing, which is I. And when they're marking and discussing and they lose track of where they were, they might get pissed off and um, start giving you whatever marks they feel like giving you and not actually fully test your application. So just to be safe, so when they forget where we left off, just make sure you output or where they currently are in terms of getting the input. So regions dot beers at that specific J dot name is equals to input box. Enter the name for that craft beer for craft beer. And then since I copied that, I'm just going to append it so that it saves time. thing is, if I zoom out too much, you guys won't be able to see properly, but let me just zoom out like this a bit. Yeah. So craft beer price. So we need to get the price. And what else? The rating. So we need to get the price and rating. So price and rating. So regions I dot beers that specific index J dot price, which is a double. So CDBL. So convert to double. Input box, and then enter the price for craft beer, and then specify the craft beer number, Control V, and the region number. So regions I dot beers J, the last thing is the rating, dot rating is equals to C int input box. This IntelliSense is just all over the screen. So enter the rating for craft beer, followed by the craft beer number and the region number and the question mark. And then I'm done getting all the inputs, right? Remember, you might ask, where is it? Where do we instantiate beers? Remember, it's instantiated within the constructor for JRegion. There it is. We instantiated all of them here. So it's not there's not going to be an error. So we did get all the information because they said you should user provides, make sure you instantiate the region object. Then for every craft beer in the region, user must provide the rotot and as well as the rating. Then use the appropriate craft beer record struct record from the random access file using appropriate function. Say things like that. So let me see. Let me just double check something here. I'm not sure if we are reading the information from the file or we are writing. We have to write it to the file. Could be makes use of record to save. Oh yeah, okay, it's fine. I thought maybe it was supposed to be in a certain way, but it's fine. So they say user must provide the appropriate craft beer as well as the rating for the beer. But then that's not all they have to provide. Remember, they also have to provide the name and the price. I don't know why this paper they did that. You're supposed to get all of them. Though not just not no you're not supposed to just get craft beer ID information and rating. No, there's also the name. There's also all those pieces of data. And then set properties means that you're setting them. You equals to. That's how you set. That means this is what we did here. When you say name is equals to price is equals to, that's setting the properties because we made use of the properties. Then you need to display the details of each region. So I need to display the details of each region. So I need to have a display regions button. So I need to go to my properties. So I'm going to call it display regions, right? And then the name of the button is btn display regions. And then I'm going to go to my toolbox. I need a text box, right? So text box. And remember, how do we set those specific settings last time? We need a scroll bar. So I need to say multi-line so that you can scroll through it. But then remember, we have to display, so determine the region which had the highest rating, display the details of this region. So I still need to display the region with the highest rating. So yeah, so there's things like that. So I can't just fill up the whole screen with this text box. So I might just make it just somewhat or enlarge the form a bit to somewhere there. Then this means this should be a bit larger. So I need a label for that. So I need to put a label here. right? So they said region with the highest average rating. So I'm going to go to my properties for the label, and then the text for this label should be region with highest average rating. You could put the label somewhere there, but I'm gonna put it here so that it's visible, and I need to enlarge it. So properties. Yeah, my laptop is burning. Visual Studio uses up a lot of resources, but it's fine. One day I'll get a better one. So we have this. So I'm gonna put it somewhere here in the middle, right? Then I'm going to go to my toolbox, and then I'm gonna need a text box again. And remember, we need to enable it to be scrollable and things like that. I'll enable those things after I'm done here. So multi-line. So we need to display the highest rating, the one with the highest rating here. Yeah, so this should suffice. So I need to give them names now. So name, because I won't remember whether this is text box 1 or text box 2. So hence I'm gonna name them. So txt output. That's for my output, and then this will be called txt highest. So txt highest. And then I need to go to scroll bars. Where's scroll bars? And then I don't need the horizontal one. I need the vertical ones. So this time around, I'll only choose vertical, right? And then I'm gonna click save there to save the changes, and then scroll by, and I'm gonna need only the vertical ones. And then I'm gonna click save to save the changes. And then there's my GUI, right? And then I'm gonna rename the form. You don't have to, but I'm just gonna rename it to FRM something, right? So where's the name here? So that's the text, but let me just call it craft beers, and then save the changes. And then there's the name, so it'll be FRM craft beers, and then change the name there. And then display regions, right? So we need to display the regions, which should be straightforward. So I'm gonna go through all the regions. For I as integer is equals to 1 to n regions. And then I'm going to say txt output dot append text. Remember, we need to append or add to the current text so that we don't override or delete what's already there. So I'm gonna go through my regions array at index I, and then I'm gonna say dot output and call the output method, right? And then done. That's how you display. And then what else do we need? I think we need the file handling part. So let's get to the file handling part. So let's go back up. So we need to define craft reg. So we define this within our form, right? We're going to define this within our form. So define a structure called craft reg with the following fields to represent the particular craft beer. So I need to create that record structure. So I'm gonna go back to my form. So let me close my form and then double click on the button again, just to, okay. Yeah, that's fine. Then here I could define the record structure before the variables, it's fine. So I'm gonna define it here. So private structure craft beer rec. And then we have three things: ID, which is an integer. So public ID as integer. And then we have a name and the price. So public name as a string, and then public price as a double. But then remember, when it comes to the string, if a string can be of any length, we do not want that. let me explain a bit about random access files, right? So draw.io. So let me explain a bit about random access files. So remember we did sequential files, which means that it's in sequential order, one after the other. But that can be the problem with sequential files, right, is that it's not best suited for big applications. Let's say, for example, a banking app like or a bank like Absa. Yes, let's say they've 10 million clients and they're looking for you. And let's say you happen to be your surname happen to be an M or an N. You see, that's going to be very far. It will take might even take the whole year trying to look for you. So instead of doing that, right, random access files, it's in the name itself, random. So you randomly access. So by randomly access, it means that you can index or go straight to that record that you're looking for randomly, right? So you can have, for example, let's say record one, right? And then I'm going to create multiple of them, right? So let's say these are our records, right? So some record is there, some other one is there, this one is here, right? So these are our records, right? So I'm gonna color them, just give them different colors. I won't change to record two, whatever, but just know they're different records, just for the sake of time. I'm not going to rename all of them. So remember, this is all of our records. So what usually sequential files, right? They'll be right next to each other, right? Like this. They'll be literally next to each other, hence sequential files. They're in sequential order. But like I just finished explaining, sequential files they are very slow when you're dealing with big applications. Small applications, let's say for example, you have 10 people in your system, your app has 10 people. It's easy because it's going to be fast. There's only 10 people. Imagine there's 10 million or even 100 million. Some apps have like 200 million users. Imagine you're looking for a person and they happen to be at position 190 million. How long would that take? A very long time. So what we can do is we can search in the file randomly. So we can choose the specific bytes to read. How does it know which bytes to read? So it knows the bytes to read technically, right? Let's put it this way. Technically, they're still in sequential order, but you can access them. You can access a specific record. It's still like it's technically still in sequential order, right? So let me show you. It's technically still in sequential order like this. So I'm gonna put it here and then put this one there, right? So technically they're still in sequential order like this, right? Technically, right? Then since they're in sequential order, how would it know which one stops at where? So we now introduce this thing called size, right? So we need to define each record a size in bytes, how big it is. So let's say, for example, this is 42. Okay, let's make it simple. Let's say this is 10. Each record structure is 10 bytes. So the way it will count, it will say, okay, this is 10 bytes. This is also 10 bytes, right? But then the way it counts is that this is 10 bytes, but it's number two. So 2 times 10. So this would be 20 bytes since it's a number two. And then this is at number three, right? So they say this would be 30 bytes. And then this would be 40 bytes, right? And then this would be 50 bytes. So this is what we're trying to achieve, right? It's not actually stored in this case. We're trying to achieve this in such a way that I can see, oh, okay, if every record structure is a fixed size. So since every record structure is a fixed size, that means I cannot allow the string to be of any length. I need to make it fixed. So I need to say, I need to come here and say VB fixed string, right? And specify how many characters. I said 35. So it needs to be a fixed string so that I can calculate the total number of bytes. Remember, an integer is 4 bytes. So this would be 4 bytes, right? And then a string, each character, since since the languages like Visual Basic, Python, Java, they store in what we call Unicode, which is universal code, right? Basically, you're able to represent all the characters, including the characters in other languages, all languages, whether that's Chinese, not really Chinese, Mandarin, Cantonese, all those languages, right? You can represent, so it's 2 bytes. So 2 bytes per character, but the maximum length is 35. So 2 times 35, which would be 70 bytes. So 2 times 35. Okay, 2 bytes each character, right? And then this will be equals to 70 bytes. How did we get to 2 bytes? Because remember, computers store everything in numbers. So how would we represent characters? We represent characters by assigning a specific number to a specific letter. That's what we call ASCII or Unicode. That's what Unicode is doing. So the maximum is 2 bytes, right? So which is basically a short, but yeah, we're not going to get into that. And then a double is 8 bytes. If you happen to have a float is 4 bytes. It's half the double. Hence, the double data type is called double because it is double precision. It's twice the precision of a float. So if it's twice the precision of a float, that means the float is 4 bytes, right? So now we can find n, because remember we need to create our hash function. So we can find n to be 4 bytes plus 70 bytes. Is it 70 or it has to be, I think it's 2. If I'm not mistaken, it's 2 bytes. Yeah, it's 2 bytes, yeah. So it has to be 70 bytes plus 8 bytes, which would be quick maths 12, 82 bytes. So this would be 82 bytes. So that's the total size of each. So in my example, I assumed each one is 10 bytes for the sake of simplicity and the math involved, things like that. So what we usually do, right? It's not always the case that it's in this way. You see the way I've written it, this is the easy way. That's what we're trying to achieve by hashing. So when we hash, this is what we're trying to achieve. So that it's sort of like, it sort of looks like it's in sequential order, sort of, because now we can access it using a specific index. So what do I mean by that? So for example, if I want the third record structure, right, I can say go to index 5 or the go to index 3, right? But then what is the size of each record structure? The size of each is 10. So this will be 3 times 10. So it will look for the record structure at that specific location where the total bytes is 3 times 10, which is this one. You see that it becomes a big O notation of 1, right? You understand algorithms in ComSci 3A, but it means that I access the record structure instantly, just like that. So that's the whole point of hashing. We're trying to mimic sort of like an array whereby each record structure can assume that it's at the specific index. That's what we're trying to achieve here. So yeah, so it's going to be 3 times 10, which is 30. So there we go. It's an instant. I find the record structure instantly. Instead of having to search, go through this, go through that, go through that, go through that, it will take me it might even take me years to look for that person. So this is very efficient. So we're going to hash so that we mimic this thing of indexing, right? So that it's sort of like an array, but it's not really going to be like sequential because remember it's random. It's going to be, let's say one, come on, one is stored down there, the other one is stored here. They say this is 40 bytes, and then this other one is stored down there, which is 30. But it's sort of like mimics an array, right? It's sort of like we indexing fast. We get the record structure fast. It's like instant. So I have this down there, and then that's pretty much all we're trying to do. This is what we're trying to do with random access files. They are randomly stored, right? But I can find it instantly, even though it's randomly stored. So that's what we're trying to do. And remember, our hash function helps us to hash or basically create indexes. Hash or create indexes, right? Um, So hash will create indexes so that, for example, this will be at index 0, index 1, index 2, index 3, index 4, things like that. Or position 1, position 2, position 3, position 4, position 5. And hashing also helps us to avoid collisions. If we don't we don't store it at specific positions, right? It's going to cause collisions. Because if we use, let's say, for example, using the person's student ID number, right? We might generate the same number, meaning that we might cause a collision. But if I hash it, that means that it'll be stored at its own, sort of like its own position, because it will have its own number of bytes. Because this one is 30 bytes, meaning it's at position 3. This one is 40 bytes, meaning it's at position 4, because it's 4 times 10. This one is the position 5 because it's 5 times 10. So each record it gets stored in its own position. We avoid collision. And they sort of like gave you a hint when they said, where is it? They said you may assume that no collisions will take place. So that they mean hash the ID, right? We need to hash that ID. So use the ID to sort of like create an index in the file. So like index by position 0, position 1, or position 2. That's what I mean by index. So to hash, you need three things. You need two things, N and P, right? So N basically means you need to find out the number of records, right? And then P, what would be P? P would basically be any prime number less than n, even though n, even though n is a prime. Even though n is a prime, you still need to find that p. So if you look at our number of records, right, they told us, they said it's 27. If I'm not mistaken, 27 is a prime number, but they said less than the number of records. So it has to be, let's say 26. 26 is not a prime because it can be divided by 2 and also other numbers, so it's not a prime. And then 25 is also not a prime. It can also be divided by 5. And think also divided by 3. So there's multiple values you can divide by. 24 is also not a prime. So 26, 25, 24 is not a prime, but 23 is a prime. So that means in our case, P would be the number 23. Then the hash function, right? The way the hash function works is that the hash function takes in a key, right? Which means that ID, whatever you're trying to hash. In our case is that key. So it takes in that key and then we mod it, right? We find the remainder. So we mod to find the remainder, modded by that prime number, which is that P here. So the formula would just be key modded by P. So that's the formula so that we can get this indexes, right? Because remember, this will be at index 4, 4 times 10, which is the size of the record structure. It's actually a pretty simple concept once you really understand it. It's actually a simple concept. So create a random access file that will be able to store 27 record structures. You may assume that the file is saved in the local folder, like we did last time. The local folder is within the run folder, which is within the debug folder. So we need to create that file there. But then remember, they told you how to name the file. I think they did explain down there. Where is it? But they do explain how to name the files, right? So, okay, here they didn't explain. I guess in some papers they don't explain, but they will explain how to name these things, right? Yeah, they do explain. So I'm gonna name it and usually save it as, like, since it's a binary file, we're gonna have to save it as .dat. Remember, it's still binary files. We're still dealing with binary files, but now we are randomly accessing them. We're not storing it sequentially. We're not accessing it in sequential order. We're accessing it randomly. So I'm gonna go there and then go to this PC. I was supposed to save it on desktop, but I forgot while I was creating the project, but that's fine. Then go to source, then repos, and then there's the project. So it's within the bin folder and then debug. So this is where you should save it. That's what they mean by local folder. So I'm gonna right click and create a new file. It's .at. Usually they say it should start with a small c, if I'm not mistaken, then followed by a student number. So 2211 so 22. Yeah, I'm just gonna save it like this. So I need to remember that file name. So 222s and 111s. So that's how I'm going to remember it. And it starts with a small letter C. So write a hash function that will given a record will return a record position. Remember, we're trying to hash and find a position or index so that we sort of like create an array, sort of like indexing into the file, which makes accessing very, very fast because it's instant, even though the files are stored random. So I'm going to have a function, so private function, call it hash, which takes in a key as integer, and it's going to return an index or a position, so integer. So this will be my hash function, right? So this will be my hash function. So it's unlike sequential. Remember sequential, there was an arrow, right? While its fs position is less than fs.length. So remember there was sequential, it was like this. So let me choose the arrows. Remember sequential, it was like this. There was an arrow. It starts here and then it checks. Have I found the record? It searches. Is this the one? Is this the one? Is this the one? So if I have 4 million records, that would take me 4 million checks. What if the person, let's say the worst case scenario, the person we're looking for is the last person, which is number 4 million, which would take me 4 million checks, which is very long. So yeah, hence random access files are very efficient. So the formula just returned that key modded by, so we're gonna say modded by our P, right? So what is our P? Our P is that prime number which is less than the number of records, which is going to be 23. If I'm not mistaken, 23 can only be divided, has only two factors, one and itself. So I'm gonna use 23 here as my prime, is the prime number that I'm going to mod by. And then we need to write a subroutine. So they told you that write a subroutine that makes use of the hash method developed in question 3 to save a single record to the random access file. Use the subroutine to save a number of records to the random access file. So yeah, we need to make use of that. But before we do all of that, we need to create our file stream, right? Remember to be able to write to the file, we need the file stream. So I'm gonna call it fs as file stream, and then it's going to add that import statement for me. So imports, for those who doing C++, imports this, right, is the same as saying hash include system.io. It's exactly the same as doing that. So that's why I say you're doing exactly the same module. The only difference is syntax. So I'm gonna need to remember, since we are dealing with sequential files, right? We need to do this thing called seeking. We need to seek or look for it, right? So we work with two things, binary writer and a binary reader. As binary writer, and it's going to import for me. I'll show you at the top once I'm done. And then BR as for binary reader. So if you check, okay, so it's part of the system.io. So as long as you say import system.io, then you're done. And then they said you should create a subroutine to save to a record. So subroutine to save to a file, to save a record to a file, right? So we need to create that subroutine. And then they said you should save one. So this subroutine should be able to save a single craft record to a record to a file, but they said a single craft beer record, so I need to take in that craft beer record as a parameter. That's that they didn't. I know it's a bit tricky, but you need to think here. So I'm gonna call it save to file, Okay, I'm so used to C++ and Java. So you need to spell it like this, and you should be able to save to a file, right? So it takes in a craft beer rec, which is that record. So craft beer record, comma, or didn't I create a craft beer rec? As okay. I'm thinking about a different syntax. So it's record as craft beer rec. Like I said, I'm so used to other languages. So I'm taking a record of this type as craft beer rec. Then we're going to save it to a file. So before we do that, we need to instantiate our file stream. So we need to create that connection to our file. So new file stream so that we can stream or send out those bytes or receive bytes from the file. So it needs to take in the file name. So I'm going to say dot backslash, meaning within this current folder, which is the bin, the debug folder which is within the bin folder. You don't know how to locate it. So C 222 dot dat, that's the file. And then the file mode, so file mode dot open. So I need to open the file. That's what I'm doing. And then file access. When I'm accessing, I want to do what exactly? I want to write. So file access dot write. Right, no pun intended. So file access dot write, file mode dot open. So since I'm writing to the file, listen to the terminology, I'm writing to the file. So I need to initialize and instantiate the binary writer. So new binary writer, which expects you to pass in the stream that you're using to write to that, or yeah, the stream that you're using to write to that file, which is fs, the file stream. And remember, you always close the connection. So always close the connection to the file, or else Visual Basic will still use those memory resources even after you're done reading or working with the file. So we do not want that. So want to write to the file. So since we want to write to the file, the way to write to the file is simple. You say br so if I'm not mistaken, you need to say .sig, right? So br.sig, you need to use the sig function, and then you need to specify two things: an offset, meaning the current position, or no, not the current position. Offset meaning it's sort of like sets the position within. Basically, yeah, it's sort of like the position. Yeah, it sort of like sets the position. Yeah, it does set the position. So the offset will set the position. Offset it meaning setting at this position. So what position, which is going to be that record that we're taking in we're going to use its ID, right? Times it by the size in bytes of our record structure. But we did calculate it. It happens to be what? 82 bytes, right? We did calculate it. It's 82 bytes. So I'm going to scroll down and say times 82 bytes. Then our seek origin, I need to say seek, you can say seek origin dot current or seek origin dot begin or seek origin dot end. I want it to start from the beginning and sort of like, in a way, it's going to sort of like store it in this, in whatever order, but it's going to store it in that way, starting from the beginning of the file. So seek origin dot begin. But then remember this ID, if we leave it like this, there's a high chance of collisions. By collisions, right, this is what you mean. Let's say, okay, let's say we're not doing it this way. We're not using indexes, right? So let's say I have an ID number here, something like this. And then another client or another record that we're trying to save has a different ID, right? But then if we multiply by the size of bytes, it happens to generate the same size of bytes. So let's say they had a different one. Let's say 1, 2, 3, something like this. theirs is different, but when you multiply by the number of bytes, we happen to get the same number of bytes. So let's say the number of bytes that I got is maybe 120 bytes. So, and then this also happens to give me 120 bytes. So you see the problem here. There'll be a collision. They'll be stored in the same position, sort of. So now when you say you want something at that specific place with that ID, it's going to calculate it in terms of bytes, but then it's going to say there's two things stored at that specific space. So what should happen now? So it becomes confusing. So we need to hash it in such a way that it gets a unique. So I need to call the hash method to hash that ID to make sure that it's unique, right? There's no collisions. So I'm going to undo this to make sure that there's no collisions. And once I hash, right, when I hash it, it sort of like makes it even 10 times easier because now I can just specify the index and say it go to position 4 in the file, but times that by the number of bytes because that's how it's going to store it in the file, by the number of bytes of each record structure. So it's like I'm accessing an array. I'm basically saying go to index 4, but I must not forget to multiply by the number of bytes because that's how it's going to store it in the file. So seek at that origin, right? And then I need to write out this data, right? This is the data, CraftBeer rec. So what's the data? It's three things. I need to write the ID. So I need to say br dot write so that I write that specific thing that I want to write. So in this case, it's record dot ID. I want to write the ID and then br dot write. What else do I want to write? Record dot name. And then the last but not least, the price. So br.write record.price. So these are the three things that I want to write to the file. In my case, there's only three things because those are the only things I was supposed to define within the record structure. So if I scroll down, this will be complete. So this is done. So I need to make use of this method and write to the binary file. Or write to the binary file, but in sequential, right? So I need to not sequentially, I mean randomly. So I need to call this. So the text here should be write to file, right? And then I'm gonna call it btn. The name should be okay. So I need to select it, then go to properties, and then the name should be btn write to file. That's what I'm going to name it. And then I'm going to double click on the button. And then I'm going to call this method to write to the file because they said use this subroutine to write to the file. So they actually made it easier so that you don't have to write this within a loop. You just write one line within the loop because there's going to be multiple craft beers, right? So let's check here what they say. Use the subroutine to save a number of records to your or to save a number of records to your random access file. Write a function that will use a record key parameter to locate and read the relevant record from the random access file. The function should return a CraftBeer record containing the data and will be used to retrieve CraftBeer data in question 8. You may assume that the record key will always be, that will provided will always lead to an existing record in the file. So basically, let me see. How far is it? Okay, I will also do the UML. So so input of region and then display of region information, calculation and display of highest rated region, and then calculation and display of highest rated region, and then correct, and then blah, blah. Okay. Okay, application of files. Where's the actual file handling part? Because I'm only see, okay, yeah, I don't see the actual file handling part. Oh, there it is, yeah. So the defined record structure, get marks. So setting up the random access file, There's marks for that. And then creation of random access file, then hash function, and then write record to random access file using appropriate validation, right? And then saving records to correct, and then function for reading. So far, I can say that we almost have all the marks from there to there, almost all of them. So what I'm going to need is this one over here. Let me see. So we're not done writing records or saving records, whatever, however they phrased it. So we're not done doing that. So we need to do that. So let's see. Yeah, there's a lot going on. My laptop is literally making a lot of sound. Write a subroutine, we did that. So now we need to use the subroutine to save a number of records to your random access file. The question is, let me think about it. I don't see the purpose of the record structure. Oh, okay, it's fine. The thing is, I don't know in where's the information and where are we going to get the information from? Or maybe they want us to create an array of that record since they told us that it's those 27 craft records. That's the one thing that I'm not understanding about this these question papers of theirs. What's the whole point of the file handling? Because I don't see how they want you to actually make the file. We do have the record structure, right? We do have it. Or maybe they want, I don't know. I'm just gonna go. I'm just gonna assume that's how they want you to write it. Maybe you guys can let me know how they explained it in class because I don't see where, at least if they'd said that we should save this information here, which is the one inside the CraftBeer class, because that's where we have the price and the rating and all that. I don't know why they told us to create a separate record structure. So yeah, I guess the record structure part is just for you to demonstrate file handling. It doesn't have to actually store to the file because there's no actual file handling. So I don't understand what's the whole point then. So they told you that this is the maximum number, right? So 27. So does it mean that I'm going to create an array of craft beer rack and initial and set it to 27 because there's 27 records that should be saved. And then I go through that array and then I save it. I think that's maybe how they want you to do it. So that's what I'm assuming because I don't see they didn't specify. They're so vague. I don't understand why they set their papers like this. So private, let me call it records, right? And then 27 in here. And then I'm gonna say as craft beer rec. So I don't know how they want you to say it to work with it. I honestly don't know. Maybe in class, maybe they demonstrated, they told you exactly how they want it to be. But this is how I'm going to work with it. I'm going to create an array, of which this array, I don't know whether it's going to be empty or what. It's really confusing. If it's going to be empty, then what is the point? They just want you to demonstrate. I don't know. I honestly don't know what's the point of creating a whole record structure. So they're saying a record structure to represent a particular craft beer. So in my case, me, I'm just going to go off that based on intuition here. You see this pieces of data here that's here. It's exactly the same information as the information that's there, right? That's here. The same exact same thing. Name of beer, name of craft beer. It's exactly the same thing. So I'm assuming you're actually going to have to work with num of beers. So that means num of beers should actually be 27, which is a pretty big number. If we're going to have 27 beers, that's a lot. Maybe that's why they don't actually want you to save the data or to work with the actual information or the actual class, because that would be too long, because there's 20, they want you to say to work with 27 records. So it's fine. I'm going to work with that. I'm going to make it just an array, like just an empty array, just to demonstrate how to save to the file. So remember, we already saved to the file using this subroutine. So I'm just going to make use of that subroutine. But remember, there's multiple CraftBeer. So from 1 to, there's 27. So from 1 to 27. And then I'm going to call that function save, that subroutine save to file, which expects a CraftBeer rec, which is inside records at position I. And then this is how they want you to save to the file. So this is how you'd save if we had, we actually had the 27 record structures. You confirm with me how they actually do it in class. Do they actually want you to make use of this information here or what? If they do, that's a lot you have to type in. If they don't, then it's fine. I'm going to leave it this way. And then we've saved to the file, just one line, because it will just call this helper method that we were told to create. And then we've used the subroutine, right? So that means in our mark sheet, we have all the marks up until here. We have all of those marks. The only mark that's missing is this one that we're about to create, this 7 marks. So we need to create that. So that's those 7 marks. It's out of 100, right? Which is 7%. So we need to do that 7%. So 7%, write a function that will use a record key parameter. So it takes a key, just like the hash function, it takes a key to locate and read the relevant record, right, from the random access file. So in my case, I think they want you to get the one. I'm not sure if it's the one with the highest. Yeah, is it determine which region had the highest average rating? Display the details of this region. Okay, that's separate. Yeah, okay, that's separate. Yeah. Yeah, this is separate. So we still have this 8% not implemented. That's separate. I thought reading here, I would have to read the highest. Okay, it doesn't really matter. It's just reading. So so this is a function. So this is a function that reads a specific, yeah, it reads a specific record. So I'm gonna say, so since it reads a specific record, we'd have to get the record from the user and we have to validate that record. So properties, so the text is, I'm gonna ask the user to enter ID to read, right? Because they're going to enter the ID to read from the file, right? So ID and then scroll down, btn read, just keeping it simple. I'm just gonna call it btn read. But this function to read the record, right? It needs to work with the function. So I need to create a function, like they said. So private function read from file. So I'm just going to call it read from file. And they said it takes in a key, which will be used to read. And this function should return a CraftBeer rec, which is a CraftBeer record structure. That's what it should return. They told you the function should return a CraftBeer record containing the data that we received. So what I need to do is I need to ask the user to enter the ID, right? So, but I'll ask it here. You see, this is where I'll ask those questions. Here, it will just assume that that's the ID being passed, right? But this ID, let's check. So we need to be able to read relevant data from the random access file. So how do you read? So I need to instantiate my file stream object. So new file stream, and then it takes in that file name. So backslash. C triple two triple one dot dat, and then file mode dot open. I want to open it, and then file access. I want to read the file now. I'm no longer writing to the file, and since I'm reading, I'm going to instantiate a binary reader. So new binary reader, which should expect a stream. So I need to pass the stream that I'm reading from. But remember always to close the connection to your file. So always close connection to file. Once I've read, I need to seek, right? So br dot, do I need to seek? Oh, I don't need to, wait, it's supposed to seek if I'm not mistaken. Doesn't it seek? Yeah, it is binary reader. And I didn't instantiate. It is binary reader. Okay, seems like there's no seek method. So, okay, it's not a member. So do I just start reading or what? Let me just double check something. The binary writer, it had the seek method. I was able to seek. So the binary reader seems like it doesn't have. Seems like it doesn't have because I said br.seek. You see, it's not finding. So I think I can just use from the file stream to seek, right? Yeah, I can just use from the file stream. So I'll use the file stream. Where am I seeking? Remember, we hash the ID, which is that key, right? We need to hash that ID, which is that key that's being passed. So I use that key, and remember, the hash function does the calculation by modding and things like that. But after hashing, I need to multiply by the size of the record structure, which is 82 bytes, right? Comma, I need to set the seek origin. I'm just going to set the seek origin to begin. You can set it from the end or to current, but usually you should set it to end or to from the end or from the beginning. Usually that's how it's going to work. So I'm going to seek in my file stream that record with this key. And then I'm going to start from from the beginning. You could set it from the end, whatever, but I'm just going to stick to from the beginning, right? And then this should allow me to read. So let me say br dot read. Let me see. Can I read an object? You can actually read an object. Interesting. So you can't read an object. So you can only read primitive types, meaning the normal types. And remember, it expects me to return a craft beer, right? Since it expects me to return a craft beer, this is how I'm going to remember what. Okay, this is very. It's gonna confuse some people, but don't be confused. Remember the name of the function, we can use it as a variable. Look at the data type of that name of function. It's craft beer rec. So I'm going to say read from file. You could create a local variable, that's up to you. And I say dot name, right? Okay, let's start with ID. Dot ID, right, is equals to br dot read int 32. So int 32 just means it's a 4-byte integer. Remember, we stored a 4-byte integer. Remember, reads a 4-byte signed integer. We stored a 4-byte integer, so we need to read back that 4-byte integer and store it inside this records craft direct beer's ID. And then the next thing that we stored, we need to read it in that specific order. Remember the order that we wrote, we saved it in. We saved it in as ID, followed by name, followed by price. We need to retrieve it in that exact same order, or else we're going to have issues. So read.name is equals to br.read string, dot read string, because we're reading the string, and then read from file dot price That's the last thing. br dot read double, not decimal, double. So we've read from the file and stored it into this record structure, which we're gonna use the name of the function to make things easy. Then at the end of the day, we should return that CraftBeer reg, which is read from file. And then that's pretty much all you had to do there for that function. So for that function, okay, you still have to call it, but for that function in question 8, oh, okay, yeah. I see what they're talking about. You see that they did mention here. So they said this function we should return record a craft beer reg containing the data, and it will be used to retrieve the craft beer data in question 8. You may assume the record, but it's going to be used in question 8. So look at question 8, okay, which is here. Which one is question 8? So let's look at the mark sheet so that I see it, which the questions clearly. So there's the questions here, you see. The actual question, I'm confused. These people are not, they're just not straightforward, man. I don't like how lecturers are setting papers. Which one is question 8? Is this number mean question 6 or what? Question 8 will be this, if that's the case. So your application must allow the user to specify any number of objects I want to create. The user user provides the region name and number of beers, region was instantiated. Oh, okay, yeah, there it is here. So what are we supposed to do here? So retrieve the appropriate craft beer record from the random access file, right? Using the appropriate function. But why would we do that? But let's see. So now I see why they only ask the user to enter the ID and rating, because the other information we're going to retrieve it from the file. So this is very tricky if you're not careful, because I was confused. So we don't actually need this read function. Yeah, this button, we don't need it. So now I understand what they were talking about here. So let's delete that button, then go back to where we're getting the information. Because they did say you should only take in the rating and the craft beer ID. The user must provide the craft beer ID as well as the rating for the beer. So we are reading from the file here. So it should use the appropriate function to retrieve the reconstruction from the random access file. So we do have, okay, I see you're supposed to, the ID, okay, I see. Okay, I see the ID. Because we need the ID. Remember, the ID is the key. Remember, this function expects a key, so we actually need to read the ID, which is the key. So I need to delete these two middle parts, which is getting the name and this is very tricky. Getting the name and what else? Yeah, getting the name and that other thing. What's the price? So we're going to get only the ID and rating, as they've stated here. So they stated that you should only provide the craft beer ID as well as the rating for the beer. And then you retrieve the other information or using that appropriate function, which is that read from file function that we created. So since I have the ID here, so I need to pass this ID is going to act as the key, right, to read. But then remember, this returns a craft beer record. So dim, I'm gonna call it record, right, as craft beer reg is equals to read from file. and then it's going to take in that ID, which is going to act as the key. Right? That's what they meant. After retrieving from that file, it's going to return and store it inside this, right? But I still need to initialize the information because the only things that I've initialized here, it's the ID and rating. So I still need to do other things. So this will be reading from the file. I knew that there was something. They can't just give you a short paper like this. It was a tricky paper. That's why they gave you on purpose as a short paper. It's just to trick you. So underscore.name, which is stored inside record dot name, because I've retrieved that name from the file and I've saved the record here. And then the last thing is the price. So regions at I dot beers j dot price is equals to record dot price. Yeah, so this is how they want you to actually get the rest of the information. That's why I wasn't understanding why they only asked you to get the ID and rating. I was like, maybe they forgot, and they had bigger plans in store for you. And then the last thing is the highest average rating. So I need to calculate the average rating. I need to find the record or the region with the highest average rating. So that's the last question. Then we do the UML. So let's do that. So and they said you should display the information. So it needs to be within a text box. So hence I did that. So highest average rating. And then this will be BTN highest. Just to make it simple, call it BTN highest. So when the region with the highest average rating, right? Remember, we have this calc average rating. So I need to use that calc average rating and sum, to calculate the sum, and then divide it by the number of regions because each region has an average rating. Then once I've okay, not really a sum, not a sum. No, my bad. It's not a sum. I'm gonna go to every single calc average rating by each average rating by calling the calc average rating and find the one with the highest, meaning a maximum. So before I do that, I know it's going to be a double. So I'm gonna say dim max as a double. It starts as the first region. Remember the logic that we talked about. If you are comparing something, if the formula for the highest, right, to find the highest or the lowest, whatever, you always assume the first thing is the one that is the highest. So that means I'm going to say regions, my regions array at index 1, meaning the first region, dot calc average rating. I assume that's the highest at this point because that's the only one I've seen. Then I continue by going through all of the average ratings. But remember, I can't start at 1 because if I start at 1, I'm going to compare myself with myself. That's pretty redundant. So I'm going to start at 2 because I've already assumed the first one is the highest. So I'm going to start comparing from the second one up to n regions, and then next I, and then we do a simple if statement. So if my maximum happens to be less than the current average rating, so regions at I dot calc dot calc average rating, then what does that mean? That means that my previously assumed maximum is actually not the maximum anymore. I need to update it. So I need to say max is equals to, and then I need to copy regions calc average rating here like this. And then they said you should also keep track of the region with the highest maximum, right? So I need to create a temporary region. I think they did sort of like give you a hint here. Yeah, you see, they say determine which region had the highest rating. Which region? That means I need to store the region. So I need to create a local variable here and say call it region as J region. right? So we're gonna assume the highest region is the first region again, so which is regions at 1. Remember, that's how the formula works. So remember, these are multiple regions, multiple JRegions, basically. So I'm gonna get the first JRegion and assume that's my highest region, just like I assumed the average rating for the first region is the highest. Then here, once I found that it's no longer the highest, I also update my region variable and set it to regions at that position I, right? And then once I'm done, they said I should display the highest, which is simple. So display the information for the region with the highest. So display region information. How do I do that? It's simple. I just say txt highest. I've called it txt highest dot text now because I don't mind it deleting or overwriting because it's one region, right? So region, that specific region dot output. I call the output method because that's the method that displays information for that specific region. And then you're done. You get your 100%. Yeah, that's pretty much everything. That's 100% everything that's required. So that means they might have a file to test it with. They might. But in this case, you just have to assume that they have because they didn't give you any link to any file. If they had given us a file, at least we would have output. So this is 100% everything. So you should get 100 out of 100. Okay, -5 because we still need to do the UML, right? So that's pretty much all you had to do here. It was very tricky, I'm not gonna lie. It also had me to, it also forced me to think. So that means you guys also have to think. You see this part over here, this was the tricky part. You're used to just getting input from the user. Now they tell you, okay, only read these two things. The rest you should read from the file. So yeah, and it wasn't even a sick test, so that's surprising, but it's fine. Let's do the UML. So let's do our UML. So I'm gonna use draw.io, right? Not draw.io. What is this? Deer. Let me use deer. I hope I still have it. So let me run deer. And then here it is. It's loading. Let me see how far the time is now. Okay, it's not bad. Even if it's 3 hours, you guys should be able to handle it. This was a short paper. So UML, so I'm gonna choose the class and then put it here. For you guys, it's a bit different, right? The way you do the UML, it's a bit different, but it's similar to computer science. So I'm gonna create the first class CraftBeer. There it is. And under attributes, that's where you put your variables, your instance variables. Those are called attributes. That's another word for it. So the first one, I'm gonna click new to add a new attribute. So underscore ID, its type or data type is integer, right? But it's a visibility. That means it's access modifier, it's private. You choose class scope if for you guys it's shared. If you use the shared keyword, you select class scope. In this case, we don't have any shared variables. In C++, you call that static. So you see, informatics and comp sci exactly the same thing. So underscore name is a string. So underscore name, the data type is string, and then private again, and then new. What else do we have? Price is a double, and then rating is an integer. Underscore price, which is a double, and then private, and then not class scope, it's not shared. And then underscore rating, which is an integer, and then private, right? And then operations. For you guys, I don't know why they did it do it this way, but it's for you guys a bit trick the way you do your things. So the first thing that I'm gonna do is this label, right? Remember, you guys do it this way. You put two less than symbols and two greater than symbols, And then within those four symbols, right? You write that this will be my constructors or constructor, right? I'm gonna say constructor, and then I put in my constructors. But in my case, there's no constructor. If you remember, there's no constructor. So I'll just rename this to property because we only have property methods. So I'll rename this to property, right? And then I put in the first property. So the first property is called ID, which returns an integer, an ID integer, right? So it's called ID. I forgot the actual UML. I forgot how you actually do it. Yeah, you'd have to double check. I'm not sure on the property part, right? But I think it's just like this. Yeah, I think it's just like this. And then if it's read only, that's when you have to say read only. So yeah, it's not read. Yeah, we'll get to that. Let me just quickly check. So let me stop sharing my screen for a while, and then let me quickly check. Um, because I just need to be 100% sure how you guys do your UML. So the lecture notes. So is it chapter? It's chapter what again? Um, okay, so there is, oh, it's called, you say property methods, not just property. And then mm, duh, 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 duh. So I think it's 14, chapter 4, the lecture note number 14. Okay, it's not. So if it's not 14, it's not 15. Let me try 13. It's still not it. Duh, 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 duh. Okay, it's fine. You guys will double check your slides. I don't know which slides are which, so let me share my screen again. I don't know. You guys will double check on your side because the way we do UML is not the same way you guys are doing your UML. Since you guys are doing informatics, that's not how you do your UML in the real world. So yeah, that's why I said you guys are gonna have to double check on your slides. So you say property methods instead. I thought it was just property. So ID, we have this, and then we have the name, a string. So property method name, and then its return type is string. And then we have, how many do we have? Name price, which is a double. And all of them are both right. So I don't have to specify whether it's write only or read only. And then rating, which is an integer, and then apply. And then, yeah, so we need to have our method. So there's CalcBeer value, which returns a double. So this would actually be a method, right? So this would be methods, not property methods, but methods instead. And then new CalcBeerValue, which returns a double. Then apply, right? And then the next one would be output, which returns a string. So I'm gonna go down here, create a new output, which returns a string, and then apply. And then the other two, and remember, these are helper methods, they are private. So you need to use the private keyword, and they take parameters. So don't forget that. So new validate ID, which returns an integer, and it takes in parameters. So I'm gonna go under the parameters section and click new to add a new parameter. So new, the parameter, we called it value. Its type is integer. And then apply. So there it is, but then it's private. So I need to select there and choose the visibility to be private because it's a helper method. And then I'm gonna go back here and I'm gonna take this one, validate rating, and then click new and then validate rating, which is also an integer, right? So integer, which also takes in a value of type integer and it's private since it's a helper method. And then done. That's pretty much all you have to do for CraftBeer. And then I'm just going to click OK once I'm done creating the class, and then there's my class. So I have my property methods here, and then I have my methods here. If we had a constructor, we have also constructor there. And then here I'm gonna take this, right? Take this, and then JRegion, I have 3. So underscore name. So let's create it. So this is called JRegion class. And then this one has a constructor, but let's start, we're still not there yet. So underscore name, which is a string, and then private, apply, and then new underscore num beers, which is an integer, and then that's also private, and then underscore beers, right, which is an array. So I'm gonna, okay, for arrays, for you guys, right, arrays, you indicate them this way, right? For you guys, you put square brackets like that. So the type is craft beer, right? For you guys, so let me use a magnifier. If I'm not mistaken, if I remember well, when I was checking your slides, for you guys, for here, you just say 0, right? From 0 up until some number, right? So if you leave it, I'm just gonna leave it as that. But then the size is num beers, right? I'm gonna leave it as that. So it's from 0 to that specific number. So I'm gonna leave it as that, but then it's private. Then apply. That's just how you guys do it. And then under operations, remember I'm gonna need constructor. I need that constructor label first. And then new. Remember the constructor has the same name as the name of the class, so JRegion. So this will be called the JRegion since it's a constructor, because it's constructing a JRegion or building a JRegion. Hence, it's called JRegion. And it takes in underscore name as a string. So under parameters, new underscore name as a string. And then new again because there's a second parameter, which is number of beers of type integer, right? And then apply. It's number of beers. Yeah, it's number of beers. And then we have our 2 property methods. So we also need to create sort of like the heading for property methods and say property methods like this. And then you click new. And then we need to have beers property method. So beers, that's the name. It returns a craft beer. And it takes in a parameter, which is an index of type integer, right? And this is both, I don't have to specify whether it's read only, all those things, I don't have to specify them. And then num of beers is the other property method. So new num of beers as integer, which takes in no parameter, right? But then remember this one is a read only property method. So I think I can put it here right before, is it right before the name or after? Yeah, I'm gonna put it right before the name. I'm gonna say read only. If I'm not mistaken, yeah, it's either you put it right after the name, before the name, or right before the type. Read only num. Let me choose which one looks proper. So read only. Yeah, I think this is the proper way. I'm not sure. You can just double check on your slides. So it is either read only integer or write only integer or write only depending on situation. So calc I have rating, which is a method, right? It's not a property method. So I need to create a label for my methods. And then new calc I have rating, which returns the double. And it's public, so I'm just going to leave the defaults. And then last one is output, which returns a string. So string, and then apply, and then done. So as you can see, we have composition here. So since we have composition, I'm going to demonstrate in this. I'm going to put this one on the side and then put this one on the side. So the the JRegion has a CraftBeer, just like a car has an engine, right? One thing is contained within the other thing. So how do I do that? Denote that in UML. I choose the aggregation, right? In my case, I'm going to do it like this, right? Why like this? Let me align it. So it's like this because craft beer is contained within this one. But then it's not aggregation because I am managing its life cycle. It's a composition. So I need to select here and select composition and then apply and then okay. It's composition. Why is it composition? Because JRegion instantiates it. If JRegion wasn't instantiating it, then it would be aggregation. So you see here, I do instantiate a craft beer. So that means there is a life cycle dependence. That means if JRegion is not there, this one wouldn't be created, right? That's what composition means. But if JRegion didn't instantiate this one, then it means that this one can exist independently. So this would be aggregation. So that's pretty much it for this tutorial. So I'm gonna save this yeah this. So the UML will be part of the zipped file, right? So informatics 1B ST2 2019 paper A UML. So I'm gonna save it within the where is it within the project, right? So within the zipped file for this project. So for this Visual Studio application, you see, I'm saving it here within this folder. So I'm gonna save it there. So don't be asking me about where you can find it. Just unzip, you'll find it within this folder. So I'm gonna close and then exit without save. And then that's pretty much all that's all here to do. And then I don't for the remember the other parts, I don't have to do all of that. The input, outputs, actions, blah blah. You do that. The only tricky part is just the YAML. And I'm sure the UML is worth more marks. So that's it for today's tutorial. Um, I'll see if I will be able to do another paper. I'll see. I can't promise anything yet, but I'll see. So yeah.